know about you, but I'm excited. This is not hockey night in Canada, but it is Hanukkah night in Canada. And how often does Hanukkah night in Canada happen? It happens every time we have a 150th anniversary, which coincides with an outdoor hockey game, and see Canadian Jewish Experience unveiling the Hart Trophy, which is once in a lifetime. So we're here for a once in a lifetime experience, and it's a great pleasure now to begin by asking Cantor Ben Lolo to light the menorah.
I can't do it by myself, I need you.
No, you're good. It's all, this doesn't need, you don't need a, you don't need a secret button. Okay. You can please rise. Baruch atah Elokeinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של חנוכה. ברוך אתה אלוקינו מלך העולם שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. Thank you very much. You can be seated. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight, and we also are delighted to have, I guess everyone is a dignitary, but there's a number of individuals that we would like to expend special welcome to tonight. You will hear from many of them a little bit later on. Guy Berthier, who is the librarian and archivist of Canada, Andrew Ross, archivist and hockey historian, the CEO of the Ottawa Jewish Federation, Andrea Friedman, the chief cook and bottle washer of Canadian Jewish Experience, Toma Lynch, the CFO of the Ottawa Senators, Brian Crombie, the deputy mayor of Ottawa, Bob Manette, and executive director of Ottawa 2017, Guy Laflamme. There's one special VIP that I've left for the last, because I'd like to sort of marry hockey and Hanukkah tonight. And you know that the Hanukkah, there was this miracle of the oil, a little bit of oil that lasted a long time. Well, in hockey, we have something similar. It's called the miracle of getting from one end of the ice to the other in 2 or 3 strides. And that was Guy Lafleur. Unforgettable sight. So it's now my great pleasure to begin with the speeches and to ask the librarian and archivist of Canada, who in hockey terms would have been the chief statistician, I guess, Mr. Guy Berthier, to share a few words with us.
Thank you so much. Bonsoir, bienvenue à la Bibliothèque et Archives Canada. Let me first acknowledge that we're gathered tonight on the traditional land of the Algonquin people. Monsieur Lableur, tout d'abord, merci en mon nom et au nom de tous les livres Grâce à vous, partout au Canada et aux États-Unis, tout le monde sait dire Guy plutôt que Guy. Dans mon cas, il y avait eu un gardien de but qui s'appelait Bertion. Dans certains coins du Canada, ils savent même dire Bertion. So I want to thank the Canadian Jewish Experience for holding this event here at Library and Archives Canada. Those of you who know Tova Lynch, and who doesn't know her, you know that it's totally impossible to say no to her. To get the Stanley Cup here, piece of cake. So Tova, thanks for including us in your plans, present and future. Let me point out that the link between LAC and our national game is stronger than one might suspect. Indeed, we have a unique set of hockey-related resources which are open to researchers. Resources like the P.D. Ross collection, which contains documents and diaries kept by the first trustee of the Stanley Cup before the NHL was even created. We also have newspapers, photographs, letters, records which not only trace hockey history, but help to feel and feed the debate about where or when it began. Le début du hockey, c'est un peu comme où est apparue la poutine, on ne saura jamais. And of course, it is one of my predecessors, former National Librarian Roch Cartier, who wrote the famous story titled The Hockey Sweater. How could one forget this classic 1979 story of the little boy who's mortified when the hockey sweater he gets in the mail turns out not to be the beloved red, white, and blue of the Montreal Canadiens, but the blue and white of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Maurice Richard wouldn't wear that, he tells his mother. And the mother replies very dryly, "You're not Maurice Richard." That story of the hockey sweater is almost as iconic as the Hart Trophy. C'est donc un grand plaisir pour moi de combiner ici deux de mes passions, le hockey et l'histoire, et de participer à cette célébration du trophée donné par la famille Hart. En tant que Montréalais d'origine, permettez-moi de rappeler que les joueurs des Canadiens sont ceux qui ont remporté le plus souvent le trophée du joueur le plus utile à son équipe, soit 16 fois comparé aux Bruins qui n'en ont que 12. Notre invité d'honneur a grandement aidé la cause puisque lui-même a remporté 2 fois le trophée Hart en 77 et 78. Bravo, M. Lafleur. Let me conclude by acknowledging the ongoing work of the Friends of Library and Archives Canada. Their unflagging support of events like tonight's celebration is truly appreciated. And to everyone, Hanukkah Sameach.
Thank you very much. In introducing the dignitaries, I inadvertently left out a few that were on the other page. So we got Executive Vice President of Content and Programming and Chief Content Officer for the NHL, Steve Mayer. The Executive Director of the Capital Stewardship Branch at the NCC, Gary Casey. I don't know if he's here, but MPP John Fraser. John, are you here?
He probably didn't make it.
He probably didn't make it. Okay, he's my MPP, so I can't take chances. We're all here tonight because of a lady who doesn't take no for an answer. And you know that the whole miracle of Hanukkah started with one person who said, "You're not going to tell us what to do." And that was the first fight for religious freedom. And that type of resistance, of insistence on doing what has to be done, that's what drives Tova Lynch. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you here tonight and to share a few words with us. Tova.
Good evening, everybody, and dignitary guests. It's been very nice to see everybody here coming. It's such a freezing night. to our last event of this Canada's sesquicentennial celebration. We are delighted to honor tonight Cecil Hart, the iconic coach and general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. When you heard about tonight's event, you were probably puzzled about the relationship between the Canadian Jewish experience and the Hart Trophy. This is exactly why this event is taking place, to remember the Jewish coach of the Montreal Canadiens and the famous trophy donated by his father. The first recipient in 1924 of this prestigious trophy was Frank Neighbor from the Ottawa Senators. On the eve of this important game this weekend between the Canadians and the Sens, when they are going to hit the ice playing the NHL 100 Classic game, there can be no better way than celebrate this evening with you. We are delighted to bring together for the first time in one place all the 15 panels that you can see out there. The Canadian Jewish Experience has created 6 regional panels. Many of you have seen the 9 original. On the right side we have the 6 other panels, and they include one about the Maritimes, a Winnipeg Jewish Community panel, a Calgary Smithsville panel, and the British Columbia panels, and remembering the Louis Razminski, who was the 3rd governor of the Bank of Canada, and tonight we will dedicate the Cecil Hart panel. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of a list of the success of the CJE during 2017, and I'm afraid the list is long. So we have had really a track record. We have been in all provinces, from Newfoundland to British Columbia. The exhibit was warmly welcomed in varieties of venues, including a reception by Speaker Reagan of the House of Commons, in receptions in 5 provincial legislatures, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, BC, and last night in Saskatchewan. A 3-month display in Ottawa City Hall, which Mayor Watson personally invited us to come, and we wish Mayor Watson a speedy recovery. As you heard, he's under weather, but I'm sure he's going to come out very soon. We've also been in other city halls, in Winnipeg, in Calgary, and Toronto. A 6-month display in the lobby of the Canadian War Museum, and I'd like to acknowledge Mark O'Neill, who is not feeling well. Where are you, Mark? And he's another VIP who was here, and it was really a very prestigious place to be on display right near the Holocaust Monument, so we were there for 6 months. We were in various museums. We displayed at 30 universities across Canada. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the museums we were here. The Heritage Park in Calgary, the Royal BC Museum, where it's right now in Victoria, the Stratford Perth Museum, the Western Development Museum in Saskatoon, the Diefenbach Canada Centre in Saskatoon, several schools, several synagogues, and as well as churches. The exhibit was also featured at the Stampede Breakfast with Premier Notley. In all, the CJE created 15 sets like this and that have traveled with lengths at our beautiful country. Since April 2017, the CJE has been in its permanent location at 30 Metcalfe. For this, we need to thank the NCC, and we have Bill Leonard, who is here representing the NCC. And it's not, if not for their wisdom, but they encouraged us to embark on this project, we probably would have never done this. So thank you, the NCC. And our gracious host today, in today's event. I would like to thank Dr. Pertion who always makes this beautiful room available to the CJE and other events. In particular, I want to thank my friend Nadia Haddad. She has all sorts of things to do. She's a first one. And she created this beautiful event at Cecil Hart, for Cecil Hart. Finally, I would like to thank the CJE board who are present here tonight. Neil Finkelstein, Neil, Natalie Chico, and other key people who are not here tonight. Victor Rabinovich, who spent, when he was in China, reviewing our text. Esther Kulik, who is now in Florida. Maureen Melot, who is in Israel. I invite you to go and watch the Hart Trophy panel. All of our panels and the Hart Trophy. But before continuing, I really want to say thank you again to Guy Lafleur. And I talked to him earlier about the personal experience about my late father-in-law, Brian Lynch, who many years ago went to Torso. He was a scout for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he tried to sign up Mr. Lafleur for the Maple Leafs, and Mr. Lafleur turned him down. It's a very important day for Hart, and it's a very important time to acknowledge somebody that in 1924 probably did not want to say that he was Jewish, but today in Canada, we can all say that we are very proud Jews and proud Canadians. So with this, I would like to invite some of the people to dedicate the panel. Mr. Monet, Mr. Bertium, Guy Lafleur, Mark O'Neill, Andrea, Bill, and Mr. Crosby, and moi. No. Okay, come on, Mr. Okay.
Thank you, Tova. You can clap, it's good. So, Guy Lafleur is going to be very happy to hear this. He's sitting next to the CEO of the Ottawa Jewish, she's actually what do we call her? Maybe we call her the CEO of the Ottawa Jewish Community Federation, which means that she's the community backstop. And for years, ever since she's come here, I've tried to convince her that she should stop being a Habs fan because she lives in Ottawa and she should root for the Senators. I've been a dismal failure because she continues to insist I'm a Habs fan first and I'm not changing. So you're a very loyal, very loyal person, but it's a great pleasure to call on Andrea Friedman to share with us a few words.
Thank you very much. Really, I'm just super psyched to be here. I'm a little bit like a little kid in a candy store tonight. I have Guy Lafleur, I have the Hart Trophy, the Stanley Cup, and the Canada Jewish Experience all together in one room. So it's a terrific night for me personally, and I hope it is for all of you as well. There's really three things that I want to convey this evening. The first is a real sense of appreciation to Tova and her entire team. Rabbi Book has said it before, Tova does not take no for an answer ever, and it is through her sheer determination, hard work, vision, cajoling, that got this thing done and got it done in spectacular fashion. So I just really want to say Yasher Koach, chapeau, really well done. You've done a fantastic job for Ottawa's Jewish community and quite frankly for our entire country, so thank you. The second thing I want to say is how cool it is to meet Guy Lafleur. And finally, I just want to bring together two experiences for you by telling you a story. And when you read the dedication to Cecil Hart, it says he's the descendant of the first Jewish immigrants to Canada. And so I want to share with you a very quick story tying together the immigrant experience and the Montreal Canadiens. In 1992-93, I was a volunteer in Israel for the year. And I worked with disadvantaged youth in Beersheba, which is the middle of the desert, for those of you unfamiliar with Israel. And so as a Montrealer, what did we do? We organized street hockey games with kids. So that's what we did. In the middle of the desert, I spent every day after school playing street hockey with groups of kids. And how this is directly relevant to the immigrant experience is that around that time, in 1989, the gates of immigration from the former Soviet Union opened up. And finally, Jews from the former Soviet Union were able to immigrate to Israel, to the land of their people and to the land of their dreams. And what happens whenever you're an immigrant to a new country, it's a very painful experience, and you often feel that you're never the best at anything. You don't speak the language as well, you're struggling to adjust to a new culture, a new language, a new city, a new country. It's really, really tough, and you always feel that you're one step behind. But hockey was the great equalizer for these kids, because none of the Israeli kids had experience playing hockey, and almost all of these young kids from the former Soviet Union knew how to play hockey. And so every day after school, for that 1 hour a week, these children experienced what it was like to be the best at something. And it helped with their self-confidence, and it helped them acclimate to a brand new country. Now, I'm going to tie it to the Habs, as I said I would. So if you remember, in 1993, that was the last year the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup. It's the last good year I've had. And I'm very pleased to share with all of you that the kids that I played street hockey with for several months before that had the first ever Stanley Cup parade down the streets of Beersheba, Israel. Now, we didn't have the Stanley Cup with us, but we did have posters, sticks, and a whole bunch of enthusiasm, and lots of kids, because I made them, yelling, "Go Habs, go."
So after the festivities are over, Andy is going to answer a very important question, which is as follows. There's no problem with getting ice into the Lansdowne Park for the big game on Saturday night. I'd like to know where they found the ice in the desert in Israel. But she'll tell you later on. It's a great pleasure now to invite the Deputy Mayor of Ottawa. Deputy Mayor, in hockey terms, the backup goalie. Okay? Great to have you here. Bob Manette.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Volka. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir, Madame, Monsieur. On behalf of Mayor Jim Watson and the City of Ottawa and council colleagues, it is indeed an honor to be with you this evening. Je suis heureux d'être avec vous, de me joindre avec vous aujourd'hui et de la part de Mayor Jim Watson et des conseillers de la ville d'Ottawa. As Deputy Mayor for the City of Ottawa, I am pleased to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here just in the celebration of the Hart Trophy. I want to thank Tova Lynch and the Canadian Jewish Experience for inviting me to join you here this evening. Je tiens à remercier l'expériencerie canadienne de m'avoir invité à me joindre avec vous ce soir. I am thrilled to be here as we count down the NHL 100 Classic when the Ottawa Senators host the historic game against the Montreal Canadiens this Saturday. I would also like to take a moment to recognize a few distinguished guests who have already been recognized. Andrea Freeman, CEO of the Ottawa Jewish Federation and members, Board of Directors, advisors, representatives of the Canadian Jewish Experience, the legendary Guy Lafleur, recipient of the Hart Trophy in 1977-1978, first player in the NHL to score 50 goals and 100 points in 6 straight seasons. I remember as a teenager following Guy Lafleur's career. First of all, when he came up in the draft, it was between him and Marcel Dion. And at the time, since Ottawa did not have a team, I was a diehard Montreal Canadian fan. And I was a diehard follower of Guy Lafleur. And You know, if you had, the shape you look in today, if you had skates, I'm sure you'd probably help our senators. Dr. Guy Merchon, librarian and archivist of Canada, Nadia Haddad, and other representatives of Library of Archives Canada, Brian Crombie, CFO of our great franchise right here in Ottawa. As you know, Ottawa is going through a bit of a rough spell right now, but you know, at the end of the year, we'll be competing for that medal trophy right there, and we will be one goal behind us, sir. Andrew Ross, archivist and hockey historian. The Canadian Jewish Experience is a volunteer initiative to celebrate Canada and the contributions made by Jews to the building of our modern country. L'expérience canadienne et l'initiative bénévole visant à célébrer le Canada et les contributions apportées à les Juifs à l'édifice de leur pays moderne. This work is in connection with Canada's 150th anniversary and reflects the great pride and love the Canadian Jews have for this country. It is a pleasure to join the community members and our esteemed guests during Hanukkah for this special event in commemoration of the Hart Memorial Trophy. I am honored to be here at the Library of Archives of Canada to celebrate this great unknown Jewish heritage. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être ici à la Bibliothèque des Archives du Canada pour célébrer le grand patrimoine juif encore méconnu. The Hart Memorial Trophy is an annual award given to the player judged to be the most valuable to his team. It is great to have recipient Guy Lafleur, as I mentioned, joining us this evening. The Hart Memorial Trophy was donated to the NHL in 1923 by Dr. David A. Hart, who was a father of Cecil Hart, the former manager, coach of the Montreal Canadiens. The Hart family are direct descendants of Canada's first Jewish settler. The trophy was first awarded at the conclusion of 1923-24 season for Frank Nyberg of the Ottawa Senators. This year we're wrapping up the celebration of the 150th anniversary of Canada, culminating in the historic NHL Classic right here in Ottawa. I urge you all, tomorrow night, there is an alumni game just a couple of steps away from here. It is a free event, and it should be something very special. We will be able to see a lot of Ottawa Senators greats coming back to play for the team. I also urge you, if you haven't got your ticket yet for the Classic, I'm not sure of how many tickets are left, but I urge you to try and take in that experience. And thank you for inviting me this evening. Un grand merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui, et c'est un honneur d'être ici. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Is there any truth to the rumor that the city is supplying the thin fillet gloves to everybody who attends the game?
We'll try.
Great. Thank you very, very much. It's not my pleasure to introduce Andrew Ross, but I'm going to assume that he's not going to share this with you, so I'll share it with you. Very few people know that Hart, Cecil Hart, who gave this trophy, his middle name, anybody know his middle name? His middle name was Mordechai. Now, why is that so significant? Because if you remember a little while ago when Captain Ben Lolo led this singing of Mo's tour, the author of Mo's tour is a man by the name of Mordechai. You didn't know that. You come all the way to Lafayette and Archive. You got to dig to find these things out. Right. So, you know that there's also something quite interesting. We have a Hart Trophy, we also have a Ross Trophy. From what I know about hockey, the Ross Trophy goes to the fellow who scores the most points, right? So we're going to call now on Andrew Ross to make a lot of points about Hart. Andrew, please come up.
I got one better for you, Rabbi. My son's name is Hart Ross. Yeah, it occurred to me as I was listening to people talk and as I wrote a tweet to my paper this morning that it's rather biased towards the Montreal Canadiens. And now that's okay because the man you can blame for that is sitting right there. And that's why, because in the 70s, as Councilor Monette was talking about, that's when we really got sold on, at least I did, on Canadien. It's a real pleasure to talk to you tonight on my favorite historical topic, which is hockey. I want to thank Tova and her husband Jim for organizing this event with LAC, and of course all the notables we've discussed already. Also, I had some help with some research from some people in the community, Eric Zweig, Irving Osper, and Joseph, and also Frank Brown of the NHL was quite helpful in providing some documents. Tonight, this is the educational part, but hopefully I can make it interesting for you. I'm going to tell the story of the Hart Trophy and the Hart family. Many people know the trophy, but don't know its history. And as my friend Eric Zweig noted, most people probably think the Hart Trophy is given to the player with the most heart. Because that is the most essential characteristic of a Canadian hockey player, or an NHL hockey player. And so tonight I'm going to talk about some of that history, about the important role of this Jewish family, the Harts, in the history of the National Hockey League and our national winter sport. First, I'm going to start talking a little bit about trophies. We kind of take them for granted, and for an Ottawa audience, we might take them more for granted than others. We don't have to explain how important hockey trophies are in this town. We have a statue to a trophy on the main street over there. Think about that. It's kind of a trophy to a trophy. Even leaving aside our collective national swoon for the Stanley Cup, hockey is actually kind of special in terms of its trophies having names that people recognize. Smythe, Ross, Richard, Norris, Lindsay, Calder. I don't think any other sports, maybe except for Cy Young in baseball, where you can really make that identification. Right? So those names are important. So maybe hockey is a little bit trophy obsessed. Why is this? You know, in ancient days, trophies were for symbols of victory, usually on the battlefield, and for a soldier that meant whatever you could pick up and take home with you. In the 19th century, this is the era when games became sports, trophies symbolized victory on the playing field. And in this case, for athletes, the trophy was usually some silverware. That was a big popular thing. We should probably blame the British for the silver industry providing all these cups for us. And it went to the whole team. But teams sometimes wanted to honor individual players. And that was a problem. Why was it a problem? Because of amateurism. Everyone wanted to be an amateur in the late 19th century, and if you were an amateur, you couldn't take money. So if you're going to give an award to a player, you had to give them something that wasn't something they could immediately cash in at the pawn shop, which is where we find a lot of our hockey trophies these days. The amateur played not for money, but for moral uplift. He valued the team over the individual. He valued fair play over victory. So teams gave their players useful non-monetary things like rings, medals, tie clips, free club memberships, and in one case, actually a Heinzmann piano, which actually would have been a pretty significant gift. But my favorite, this is my favorite, actually, the Ottawa Senators player once got this from his team, fresh fruit and newspapers. So how times have changed, if that's the bonus from the team, the fresh fruit. So it had to wait actually until the 20th century, and I think actually the Hart Trophy, before players got more substantial silverware on their own. And the Hart Trophy, like I said, I think was actually the first. We can talk about that. As was mentioned, Cecil Mordechai Hart was part of the fifth generation of Harts in Canada. He was the youngest son of Dr. David Alexander Hart and Sarah Matilda David. He was born in 1883, and his great-great-grandfather was the famous Aaron Hart, who's pictured here, one of the first Jews to come to Canada, and a man who left a profound cultural and genetic legacy on Quebec and Canada. Aaron was born about 1724. We're not sure exactly where, possibly England, possibly Bavaria, because that's where we think the Hart family got its name from the Harz Mountains in Bavaria. Aaron was a purveyor of goods to armies, and he followed General Amherst from New York up to Montreal, and basically selling goods along the way. The difference with him was that he decided to stay. You know, the Canadiens at the time recently invaded, and what the English would have seen him as what was later known as a carpetbagger in the US context. But unlike many others, he stayed, he settled his family around Trois-Rivières, he got involved in the fur trade, he started buying up land, and he was very successful. He died in 1800, but his family flourished. The proof, by 1849, When the seigneuries were disbanded in Quebec, the Hart descendants owned part of 7 seigneuries, all owned part, so they were very successful. Now, the family did not all stay in Port-Neuf. Aaron was a great supporter of Jewish society in Quebec. He encouraged his family to intermarry with the other prominent Quebec Jewish families, the Judahs, the Davids, the Solomons. But in quest of opportunities, his family often went further afield. They went to Montreal, they went to New York. Some other Harts assimilated to the point that many residents of Trois-Rivières today actually have Hart blood, whether or not they know it or not. This is a study by Denis Bourgeois, actually looked into this and went and interviewed people in Trois-Rivières and showed them you actually have this Jewish ancestry, and a lot of them were quite surprised by this. His point, Denis Bourgeois' point, was that Quebec is actually a much more multicultural society than many people would like to think it is, sometimes. Aaron's great-grandson was David Alexander Hart, and he showed how well the family were integrated. We don't know a lot about his early life, except that he may have been involved in repelling Fenian raiders. He attended Bishop's College and became the second Jewish physician with a degree in all of Quebec. As I mentioned, he married Sarah Matilda David, herself a Hart descendant, somewhat inevitably. And so through both his mother and his father, Cecil and his 5 brothers embodied many of the great Jewish clans of Quebec, the Harts, the Josephs, the Davids, just to name a few. After the family moved to Montreal, David became one of the city's prominent physicians with a fine Tudor house at 296 Sherbrooke Street near Saint Laurent. And David seems to have been a pretty cool father about the sports. He really enjoyed having his sons play sports, and he supported their activities. We know, of course, all about Cecil's activities. Primarily, he played baseball, but he made his mark as an organizer. His first mentions in the newspapers of the day are as an organizer of his own baseball club called the Stars. And one of his players was actually Art Ross, who was quite famous later as a hockey player and a builder in the NHL. True to form, Dr. Hart, Dad, supported Cecil's baseball activities and served as honorary patron of the Stars Baseball Club for many years. I think that probably means he paid the debts at the end of the season. That's usually what that guy did. As to hockey, Cecil came of age in the sport's infancy. The year he was born, 1883, was the year of the first Montreal Carnival hockey tournament, which is the kind of the event that we see is the one that, when the visitors came, saw hockey, and then spread it back to their own cities. In 1893, when he was 10, the Stanley Cup was donated. By the turn of the century, Cecil was playing high-level hockey, and by 1910, he was actually playing the top level of senior amateur hockey in Quebec, in Montreal rather, also called the Stars. So I suspect that he actually had organized that one himself as well. It was around this time that Hart met up with 2 guys named Leo Dandurand and Joe Kateranich. Leo was actually a Franco-American who had returned to Quebec and played senior hockey and lacrosse. Joe was the first goalie of Les Canadiens in 1909. So it's the team that becomes the Montreal Canadiens. Leo and Joe went into business together, importing tobacco at first, but later they discovered it was much more profitable to run the gambling operations at local racetracks. This became their specialty. And after the First World War, they saw a real opportunity because the Americans were actually behind in gambling in the sense that it was illegal. When they started legalizing it, Leo and Joe sold their expertise and started working tracks all over North America, and they made a lot of money. By 1921, they were flush with cash, and they became very interested in buying into something called the National Hockey League. Let me take a little pause before we continue the Hart saga and give you some background on the NHL, which I'll remind you, in 1921 was only 4 years old and only had 4 teams. So when people talk about the original 6, you can talk about the original 3 or 4. It was a tyke, you might say, in hockey. Hockey, as we know, of course, originated in the 1870s and 1880s, played in middle-class Anglo-Protestant institutions like the Victoria Skating Rink, McGill University, and the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association. Only later did it spread to other communities like the Irish and the French Canadian communities, and to the working classes. And the Jewish involvement was really part of what I could call this hockey diaspora. Members of these communities were often the first, however, to see the commercial potential of the sport, and it often produced some interesting alignments that you can look back on. For example, Le Club de Hockey Canadien was founded by a guy named George Kennedy. It doesn't sound particularly French. He was an Irish Canadian. He did speak fluent French, considered himself probably a mix of Irish and French. The Wanderers, which were the team of the Anglo-Protestant community, was actually owned by Sam Lichtenheim, a Jew. who owned a cotton waste recycling business. Right? So the Jews were actually in hockey early on, along with these other groups like the Irish, etc. So let's go back to Cecil. Cecil was cease to his friends, and he does not appear to have become directly involved in the tobacco or the gambling business like Leo and Joe. I'm kind of curious about this. I wonder if he had maybe a moral opposition to this. Instead, he appears to have made ends meet as an insurance salesman. And this was quite popular as well. Art Ross sold insurance. Several hockey players seem to have sold insurance. But they still trusted him a lot. He was clearly a trusted friend. And he is, in fact, is the man who negotiated their entry into the NHL. They were out of town. George Kennedy died. His widow put the team up for sale, the Canadiens. And Cecil represented Dandaran Katarinic and a third partner named Louis Letourneau. Hart won the bidding. You know what the price was? $11,000. I haven't looked up what the last time the Habs changed mine, but I think it's more like 200 million or something like that. So Hart became a corporate director of the Canadiens, and he appears to have played an active role in the team. La presse called Hart l'un des plus zélés, des plus enthousiastes et des plus actifs directeurs du Canadien. One of the most zealous, most enthusiastic, and most active of the Canadian directors. One source calls him the managing director. Dandaran Katarinic and Letourneau in the press were often referred to as the Three Musketeers. I like to think of Hart as the fourth musketeer of the Canadiens at this time. He was clearly crucial to the operation. It's underappreciated now how crucial he was, but at the time he was well recognized, I think. In April 1923, he was honored by a dinner alongside Canadien star Joe Malone, who you may know the name. As a tangible reward for the club's esteem, they presented him with a diamond tie pin. So again, there's this gifts that they're giving out. But his most important role as a director was yet to come. A few weeks later, he went down to Stratford, Ontario to sign a promising young player by the name of Howie Morenz. Dandaran was quite keen to get Morenz. He sent down another guy before who kind of failed to sign him. And so Dandaran this time gave Hart 3 blank contracts and 3 blank checks and a big wad of cash. And he sent him down to negotiate with Howie. So Hart successfully convinced Howie and his father to sign up. At that time, the age of majority was 21, so Howie needed his dad to sign off on the contract. And it produced one of the most famous contracts in hockey. And this is the contract here. You can't really read it. I thought the screen might be a little bigger, we could point it out. But yes, this has Cecil's signature on here, which is kind of neat. And you might notice, if you can see it, that there's a lot of crossing out and new paragraphs. So Howie did a lot of negotiating here. This is quite unusual for the time, actually actively negotiating and saying, no, Frank called their standard NHL contracts not good enough for him. Because, and one of the reasons he would have negotiated is Howie had a sweet deal in Stratford. Amateurism by this point in the 1920s, they essentially gave you a day job that paid you, and you really didn't have to go as long as you played hockey. It was year round. So in fact, it was often as good to be an amateur player as a pro. And once you were a pro, you could never be an amateur again, and Howie was worried about that. He tried later to get out of the contract, which is quite a story in itself. So in the fall of 1923, after this great success, Hart was honored with another dinner. They loved giving Cecil Hart dinners. They seemed to how they paid him. I wonder about that he actually got a salary, because it seemed to be all in kind, food and drink. Cecil took advantage of the connection, though. He later sold the team $150,000 worth of insurance to protect it. This might actually be the first contract I've found where they actually sold insurance on a hockey team in case they were involved in an accident and wiped out the team. But this dinner was actually pretty special this month. This dinner took place at the Reform Club, and a few days before the dinner for Cecil, David Hart, Dad, asked Leo Dandaran to come by to talk about donating a trophy to the NHL for the highest scorer. In Dandaran's biography, David Hart is described as un partisan des Canadiens enragés, which is a rabid Canadien fan. Sounds way better in French, though. Enragé. Dandaran recounts that he advised Dr. Hart to change the object of the award. He argued that an award for the highest score made sense, Monsieur Lafleur would have liked that, but that it would be biased against goalies and defensemen. Of course, Dandaran had no way of knowing that Bobby Orr would eventually be the leading scorer in the league. More importantly, in Dandaran's view, he would encourage individual play and discourage team play, and forwards would be egotistical and no longer pass the puck. So Hart was convinced by these arguments, and when a few days later, when he went to the dinner, he proposed this new trophy and had this changed his idea. And in fact, the image here we got here is, you can barely see Cecil on the right at the end of the table, facing the camera. He's on the right and his father is on the left. So this is one of these famous dinners. They're having dinners all the time. It's really quite impressive. And no women, you'll notice here either, right? All stag. Something suspicious about that. So here is the letter that donated the cup, or offered it to the NHL. And I thank the NHL, Frank Brown, for showing me this letter. It's quite fascinating. Notice the date, January 1924. This is kind of like the Stanley Cup story, where we talk about 1892 and 1893. I think we have to say 1924 is when the official donation happened, if we're looking to be picky about these things, and historians sometimes we like to be picky. He sent this letter, you probably can't read it here, I'll tell you the details. He mentions that there was a recent adoption of a similar trophy by baseball's American League. And he proposed the same system as the Americans used, that sports writers decide by voting on the player most useful to his team. So this is not the first time that baseball had been a model for hockey. It's quite, there's several stories to tell about this. There's also a note in the NHL file which seems to respond to this letter, acknowledging what Hart proposed in the letter in that last paragraph, which you can't read. The Hart Cup, that's what they called it, can be won outright by any player who captures it on 3 occasions, not necessarily in succession. So I think you want you to remember that. I also noticed that is essentially written on this cup. I found that out this afternoon when I gave it a good close look. Now this notion of it being player most useful to the team is often known as most valuable player, and again, that's what's on the cup as well. So those are kind of synonymous. And Cecil presented it to the National Hockey League at the Mount Royal Arena in Montreal on March 8th, 1924, during the first playoff game between the Montreal Canadiens and the Ottawa Senators. I will note that they played it inside. Inside. In 1924, they didn't play games outside, because they weren't crazy. 3 days later, it was presented by the Governor General, Viscount Byng, to the first recipient, which we've heard is Frank Niber of the Ottawa Senators. Of course, he has this nice picture of Frank with his trophy. The Pembroke Peach, as he was known, won the sports writer tally by 1 vote. 37 for him, 36 for Sprague Cleghorn of the Canadiens. I'm just going to say that again, Sprague Cleghorn. It's the best hockey name ever. In 3rd place was goalie John Ross Roach of the Toronto St. Patrick's Club. The Hart was the first league-wide trophy given to an individual player, and it appears to have spurred other trophies. The next year, in March 1925, Lady Byng, the wife of Viscount Byng, the Governor General, gave a trophy to be presented to the fairest and most sportsmanlike player. I often think fairest means the best-looking player, which might be kind of interesting, but I think it's more the sportsmanlike thing. She wanted to reduce rough play. She and the Viscount went to games all the time in Ottawa, and she thought it was getting a little rough, and she wanted to calm it down. Unlike Dr. Hart, Lady Byng does not appear to have asked the NHL's permission. She simply invited Frank Niber, again, to Rideau Hall and handed him the trophy and said, "Do you think the league would like this?" So Niber and the league could hardly refuse from the Governor General. This was actually tried several times where people just donate a trophy, create it, and hand it off to NHL players. And a couple of them, we don't know them because the league basically doesn't approve them, doesn't endorse them, and we don't see them ever again. One that was more successful is in 1927, after a Canadian goalie, Georges Vézina, died. D'Antonin Katernich and Letourneau presented a trophy in his memory, of course, to the best goalie in the league. But all of these, and the ones later that came, Norris, Calder, and the like, it was the Hart Trophy that became the most desirable, and I think it still is. We could ask some winners in the room tonight if they think so. Over the next 2 decades, it went to the biggest stars of the game, names that are mostly familiar to us today, names like Eddie Shore, Aurel Joliat, Babe Siebert, Toe Blake, Nels Stewart, who is not a great hockey name, but his nickname is the best in hockey, Old Poison. He was nasty with a stick, apparently. And of course, that young player that Cecil signed with Stratford, Howie Morenz. Hart's coaching career with the Canadiens began in 1926 and was intertwined with the career of Howie Morenz. In his biography of Morenz, Dean Robinson writes that Morenz was endeared to Cecil Hart. The relationship extended beyond that of the normal player-coach arrangement. Although he never played professional himself, with players like Morenz, Aurel Joliat, George Hainsworth, Hart led the Canadiens to 2 Stanley Cups in 1930 and 1931. Cecil must have looked on with some pride as Morenz won his first Hart Trophy in 1928, his second in 1931, and his third in 1932. In fact, Canadian players won the Hart 6 of the 9 seasons that Cecil coached the team. I will point out, Cecil had no votes, so, I mean, there's nothing shady about this. Now let's back up a bit. You might recall Dr. Hart's original proposal that the trophy be given to any player who had won it 3 times. A condition the NHL appears to have endorsed, and the trophy itself, if you read it, endorses. Now, I asked Howard Morenz how his grandson, I invited him out tonight, I don't know if he's here, I won't ask him to identify himself, but I will say to him that this is something that he wants to take up with Phil Pritchard and Craig Campbell, that maybe they could discuss this. But if you're successful, I'll warn you, Howard, be sure to tell the family of Gordie Howe as well, because he should have got one, but he won his third in 1957, so there might be a bit of a fight. So after a successful 6-year run as coach, Hart apparently had a falling out with Don Durant and resigned in 1932. Morenz was traded to Chicago Blackhawks in 1934, and that Canadien, of course, went into the doldrums, and Don Durant and Katarnich actually sold the team in 1935. This, of course, is the middle of the Depression. There's a lot of competition for entertainment dollars, as we like to say, and Montreal at that time, of course, had 2 teams, the Montreal Maroons and the Montreal Canadiens, and they essentially competed with each other. The new owners asked Hart to come back as coach for the 36-37 season, and he said he'd only do so on one condition, that the club would bring Morenz back. And so Cecil was behind the bench that fateful night in January 1937, when Howie crashed into the foreign boards and broke his leg. The injury was so serious that Morenz spent 5 weeks in the hospital. Just when he seemed to be on the way to recovery, suddenly he was gone. We don't know exactly why, but evidence points to a blood clot as the cause of death. Hart was devastated. The whole city was devastated. I don't have the picture here. There's a picture of filling the forum. Filling the forum. There we go, in the video. Won't see it. In the next few years, Hart, who never married, served as a father figure to Morenz's son, Howie Jr. Hart brought him to Canadian road trips and always welcomed him into the club dressing room and practices. This made it even more poignant when Hart himself was struck down with an illness and died in July of 1940, 3 years later. With that, Howie Jr. lost his second father. Dr. Hart, David Hart, father, also died in 1925, and so the trophy became the family legacy, and it still is today. It actually became a tradition to provide winners with replica versions. This might have been the substitution for giving them the actual trophy. So now there are several personal versions of the trophy in existence. One of these is actually in Ottawa. It's the replica given to Aurel Joliat in 1932, and it's in the collection of the city of Ottawa. You might notice, you won't notice because it's too small, but I'll tell you, that it's actually engraved Hart Memorial Trophy, which is essentially an acknowledgement of David Hart's death. After the Second World War, some of the replicas took an interesting form. And here we have a picture of the great Jean Béliveau with 2 of his own replicas, which I think the one on the left is his 55-56 Hart Trophy replica, and one of his 10 Stanley Cups. Now, if that thing looks familiar to you, it should. At the time, the Hart Trophy looked like this one here. All right? So look at that trophy on the left. This is the trophy, not the one over there, this one. Those of you well-versed in the history of the Canadien, which I'm sure includes most of the people in the audience tonight, especially the Maple Leafs fans, will know the importance of the torch symbol. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. This excerpt from the famous poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae was written on the Canadien dressing room wall in the Forum, and the torch became a traditional symbol of the team. I want you to note these torch replicas, again, were made before 1960. For it was in 1960 that the president of the NHL, Clarence Campbell, noted that the plaques on the Hart Trophy were all filled up and that the general condition of the trophy had deteriorated. So the NHL governors commissioned a new one from Carl Peterson, the Montreal silversmith, who was responsible for modifying the Stanley Cup, and this is what he came up with. Now, because it's sitting here, I didn't really know that I just have to show you the picture, but of course, you can look at the thing itself. Now, the correspondence, which Frank Brown provided quite generously to me, suggests that this design was actually seen as new. This new Hart Memorial Trophy, though, I think bears more than a passing similarity to the replica trophies given out in the 1950s. So I suspect, although I don't know and have evidence of this, that maybe Peterson made both of them. And I like to think this torch motif continues to connect us directly to the era of Cecil and David Hart. It's also nice to think that the Hart Memorial Trophy is most naturally held by a member of the Canadiens. The original trophy was retired to the Hall of Fame here tonight, and we are very lucky to see it here. Of course, if Howard makes a good argument to fill, we might not see it again very soon, so enjoy it while we can. Like its predecessor, the list of winners of the Hart Memorial Trophy is a list of the legends of the NHL. Geoffrion, who in fact was Harry Moren's son-in-law, Plante, Béliveau, Hull, Bobby Enbright, Mikita, Esposito, Orr, Clark, Lafleur, Lemieux, Messier. The roll call continues up to Crosby, Ovechkin, McDavid. And we can't forget, of course, Howe, Gordie Howe, who won both trophies, the original Hart 5 times and the Hart Memorial once, or Gretzky. Gretzky, 9 times, 8 times consecutively. And to think he did it without being a member of the Montreal Canadiens. It was a miracle. Hopefully Cecil and David would not have been too disappointed. Thank you.
That was a hat trick. Thank you very much, Andrew. We're getting close to wind down. You know that one of the parts of hockey is body checks. I'm delighted now to call on Brian Crombie, who is the CFO of the Ottawa Senators. He's interested in other checks.
I'm also here to give some change of content from all of the conversation about the Montreal Canadiens and talk a little bit about the team you really should be supporting, which is the Ottawa Senators. From a personal standpoint, though, I would like to make a few connections to why I'm here tonight, because this is really a personal honor for me to be on the same stage as some of the people that are present today. I think the first thing that I should mention is that my great uncle was the very first Jew that was an ambassador in the Canadian Foreign Service, and married to a Crombie from a Montreal Anglophone family at the time, and that was controversial within itself. And so I commend you the work that you're doing, and I would suggest that you may want to put up a banner to Sidney Pierce, who was the first Jewish ambassador in the Canadian Foreign Service at some point in time in the future. The second, and by the way, if I could, he told me over numerous different Hanukkah and Christmas meals stories of how challenging it was to be the first Jewish Foreign Service member at the time, which probably many of you could probably relate to. The second thing I'd love to tell you, particularly in front of Mr. Lafleur, is I grew up in Montreal. I was a huge Habs fan. I worked for the Molson companies and was a finance geek, yes, but a finance guy that got to go into the dressing room in 1993 when they won the Stanley Cup and had champagne poured on my suit. And it was one of the most special honors you can imagine, that you actually go into the dressing room, and to think that you could do it, every day of your career is amazing. But to do it once in my lifetime was pretty special, and I'm hoping I get to do it a second time in a dressing room here in Ottawa. The presentation I found fascinating. I would like to focus on one part of the presentation, if I could, and that is the first winner. And you mentioned that Frank Niber won the Hart Trophy for the first time, and I would underline that Frank, at the time, as you probably heard, was a member of the Ottawa Senators. Some people, frankly, too many people, we've done surveys, and up until this past year when we've reminded people, over 70% of people in Ottawa didn't remember that Ottawa was a member of the NHL at that time and was very successful. And they think about Ottawa and the Ottawa history for the last 25 years rather than the last 100 years. So thank you for underlining that, and I'm going to underline it a little bit more if I could. So the first winner of the Hart Trophy, Frank Niber, won it in, 1924. They went on to win 4 Stanley Cups during the 1920s. So Ottawa won, I repeat, 4 Stanley Cups in the 1920s. The other interesting thing I found out about Frank Niber, as you mentioned, he won the Lady Byng Trophy, the very first Lady Byng Trophy. And I think I'm right, regrettably, Frank Niber is the only Ottawa Senator winner to win the Hart Trophy, and he's the only Ottawa Senator player to win the Lady Byng Trophy. And I think it's also interesting that the same person who won the Most Valuable Player Award won the Most Gentlemanly Player Award. And, isn't that sort of Canadian? I'm a very proud Canadian. I went to school in the United States. I travel doing finance stuff in the United States all the time. And I always say, I'm sorry. I don't know about you, but I'm always saying I'm sorry. Even if I've not done anything wrong, I say I'm sorry, just to remind people I'm Canadian, and I would say to say that I'm not American, remind them that I'm not American, but I'm always apologizing. But I think it's interesting that the most valuable player was also the most gentlemanly player. And I think that's a great testament to Frank Niber and to being Canadian. And if I could, the other thing about being Canadian that I just love is what's going on right now this weekend. We have an incredible opportunity to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the very first game in the NHL between Ottawa and Montreal. And being played outdoors, I think, is special because growing up in Montreal, I think probably the same growing up in Toronto or Ottawa, playing hockey outdoors is part of what we were all about. Last Thursday, I got to skate on the rink at Parliament Hill. If you haven't had a chance to skate on that rink or see that rink, I commend it to you. It was just spectacular. I could show you the pictures I took. It was an incredible opportunity to skate around and take that picture with the Parliament Hill in the background. On Saturday, I'm going to the game, as probably some of you are, Lansdowne, to see the Montreal Canadiens and the Ottawa Senators play outdoors. I think there's nothing more Canadian and not a better way to celebrate the end of the 150th celebration in Canada than to play hockey, watch hockey outdoors. Maybe not -16, but still playing it outdoors. So I think that that's a great Canadian opportunity. And then the last thing I wanted to mention to you, if I could, particularly in this audience with the people here from a history and an archivist standpoint, is we have a lifetime changing opportunity. And with the deputy mayor here, and I think there was a representative from the NCC, we are potentially building a new arena downtown about 5 minutes just west of here in Le Breton Flats.
Right.
And I think it could be a testament to hockey and to Ottawa and to the National Capital Region, probably unlike anything else we've ever built. And I think people have an opportunity once in a generation or once in a lifetime to build something that really resonates and creates something special. And creating a arena downtown, and if you've seen the arenas in about a month ago, I was in Madison Square Gardens. Madison Square Gardens has a history in Manhattan that is unbelievable. You've seen the Colosseum in Rome that creates this center in Rome that is spectacular. Having an arena on the suburbs is interesting, but having an arena downtown that would then attract a whole bunch of things around it. And I would suggest maybe a new archives museum right across the street, maybe a portrait gallery right across the street. The other things that could be attracted to that area, I am convinced will make Ottawa and the National Capital Region a completely different and far more special place than it is today. And so I think that on the 150th celebration, when we're here with the 100th anniversary of the very first game of the NHL, when we're doing it outdoors, we should commit to ourselves that we can change the future of Ottawa and the future of the National Capital Region by building that. And so I think a lot of tonight has been about one issue, whether it's Hanukkah or whether it's our organizer that people have talked about never saying no, or whether it's the people that, the deputy mayor who talked about the 7th game losing streak that we've ended last night. I think there's a lot of people that have talked about resilience in the face of adversity. I think that's what Hanukkah's about. I think that's what you talked about with your leader, and I think that's the 7th. I think that there's no other thing that we should be celebrating than our collective ability to have resilience and determination in the face of adversity. So I think it's a wonderful thing to celebrate. Canada, hockey, and determination. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Melnick told me to remind everybody that he needs a little bit more Hanukkah guilt, which is money. So he needs people, till you build Little Breton Flats, you gotta go all the way out there. You're gonna use a lot more oil, but we'll save a lot on the oil. Another Hanukkah miracle when we get to the Breton Flats. It's great pleasure now to call out Marie Eve, who is going to share with us a few videos. Yeah?
Hello everyone, I'm Connor McDavid. I'm very happy to be joining you this evening celebrating this Canada 150 event, which also coincides with the 100th anniversary of the NHL. As last year's recipient of the Hart Trophy, I can tell you this was a huge honor for me, in large part because of the great names that have won it before me. From what I've learned, Mr. Hart was a well-respected coach, and his guys enjoyed playing for him. He was obviously also very successful, having won 2 Stanley Cups. Hockey has always brought Canadians together, which is why I'm so happy to be joining you tonight in our National Library, honoring this great Canadian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Corey Perry. I'm very happy to be joining you this evening in remembering Cecil Hart as part of this Canada 150 event. I was honored in receiving the Hart Memorial Trophy in 2011 and was glad to learn more about the history of the trophy and its origins in the Jewish community. Cecil Hart was a very successful and respected coach, manager, and athlete. His success is evident by his 9-year tenure with the Montreal Canadiens and 2 Stanley Cup championships. I am very happy to take part in honoring this great Canadian. Thank you and happy Hanukkah.
Whoa. So we wish Corey Perry a refuah shalem. I understand he's on the injured list and hope he has a quick recovery, but not when he's playing the Sens. Okay. Are we now on to the hockey song?
Oh.
It's not the national anthem, so
So I just have to say one thing before we start. Monsieur Guy Lafleur, j'avais 10 ans quand je vous regardais à la télévision. And I went to synagogue and played hockey in the shul floor, waiting for the hockey game to start. One of my heroes there. I don't know this song very well, but Tova said you better sing it. So you're all going to sing it. You have the words? Anybody has the words? Come on. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's hockey night tonight. In Pension Road, the whistle blows and the puck goes down the ice. The goalie jumps, the players run, and the fans go on and sing. Someone roars, Bobby scores, and the good old hockey game. Oh, oh, oh. that we have, I just want to take my picture with Guy Lafleur and then after that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming tonight. I just want to leave you with a final Jewish thought for Guy. My memory tells me that he was number 10.
Yes.
Right? Number 10. So, in Hebrew, all our letters have numbers. So, the number 10 is a Yud, which means a Yi. So, he didn't know. Every time he was going down those, in those hockey rinks and going at the speed of light to get from one end to the other, that number 10 on the back was reminding me, Guy Lafleur is a Yi. But anyway, so it's delightful to have you here, and you've elevated this into it was a great event to have you here. It's been a total pleasure. And even though I have to admit that I am a Sens fan, but I'm also a Guy Lafleur fan. So, and I think we all are. We thank you, Tola. Just enjoy everything tonight, take pictures, eat stuff is in the back. We may even have a little bit of background music and all sorts of stuff. Happy Hanukkah to the non-Jewish people over here, Merry Christmas, and go Sens, go!